Okay, so today we're still doing equivalent fractions, but we're going to be focusing on simplest terms. Let me make sure I spell it right. Yep. Simplest form. And all that means is that you want the fewest equal parts. So the fewest equal parts. Okay, so for example, yesterday we did the 1/2. So we did 1/2 is equal to 2/4 is equal to 4/8 is equal to 8/16, right? And so remember which of the numbers, the top or the bottom, tells me how many parts? That would be the bottom. So this tells me how many parts. I got a new color Sharpie. So this tells me how many parts. Okay, so if simplest form is the fewest equal parts, which one of these has the fewest parts? It will be the 1/2, so that means that is the simplest form, 1/2. So you're like, well, what do you mean, Miss Corbin? And this is what I'm talking about. So another way of getting equivalent fractions is going backwards. So to show this, we did multiplication, didn't we? We timesed it by 2, timesed it by 2, timesed it by 2. So to make it smaller, we're going to divide. Whoops, that's not division. So if we have 8/16 and we want to take it back to simplest forms, we're going to have to do two things. We're going to have to write all the numbers that we can multiply to get 8 and all the numbers that we can multiply to get 16. And the easiest way that I want to remind you of how to do this is when we write the number up here and we go 1 times 8, 2 times 4, and there's nothing else that's going to give us 8. So then we do our circle, and so that means our numbers are 1, 2, 4, and 8. And then we're going to do the same for 16. We've got 1 times 16, 2 times 8, 3 times 6, 4 times 4. And I don't think there's any others. And if you don't know your times tables, you can use your multiplication chart on that. Okay, so now 16 has a bunch. I'm going to do 16 in a different color. So remember, we go down and around. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 16. So now the trick is we need to find the ones that are the same. So they both have a 1, they both have a 2, they both have a 4, and they both have an 8. So now what we do is like, oh, the biggest one is 8. So that's the one that we're going to divide by. We want to divide by the biggest one that they have the same of. Divided by 8. So then, in my head, 8 divided by 8 is 1. 8 divided by 16 is 2. And what did we get? We got 1/2. So 1/2 is the simplest form. It's still equivalent, but this time we made it into the smallest number of pieces that we had. So let's try another one. So we're going to do 6/8. Okay, so then over here on our side, we're going to do 6, and we're going to do 8. Okay, 6 is 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and that's it. So I make my arrow up, so it's 1, 2, 3, 6. Notice how I put them in order. And then let's do the same thing for 8. We got 1 times 8, 2 times 4. I believe that's all we have for 8. So we've got 1, 2, 4, 6. So we circle the ones that are the same. And then we got 6. So which one's the biggest? 6. Oh, this is not 6. This is supposed to be 8. Whoops. So that's not a circle. So the biggest is 2. So then we come over here and we go divide by 2, divide by 2, and then 6 divided by 2 is, and if you don't know, you can come back right over here. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then 8 divided by 2, so 8 divided by 2 is 4. So the simplest form is 3/4. So they're equivalent. 6/8 is equivalent to 3/4, but 3/4 is the smallest number of parts that that equivalent fraction can have. It can get bigger, but it can't get any smaller than that. All right, let's try one more. All right, this time we are going to do 4/6. And this is just another way that we can do it. Sometimes your test will ask you simplest form, like in 5th grade. You're not going to have to do it for our test, but I still want you to know how you find it. All right, so now we do our 4 and our 6. And then we have our 4. All the factors for 4 are 1 and 4. Think of our factor pairs. 2 times 2. We did this at the beginning of the year. It's been a while. And then we've got 1, 2, and 4, because we don't need to write that 2 twice. And then we do 6. 1 times 6. 2 times 3. Draw our arrow. And remember, we want to do it in order because we need to write our numbers in order so it's easier to find our pairs. Circle the ones that are the same. 1, 2. 2 is the greatest common factor. And so that means 2 is the greatest one that they have in common, the biggest one. So that means we're going to divide by 2. Divide by 2 equals 4 divided by 2 is 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the equivalent fraction, the smallest equivalent fraction for this one is 2/3. So there's 2 ways to do it. So now we've done the multiplication one where we get bigger, and then if we wanted, we could do the division one to make it smaller. But once we get to the smallest one, you'll realize that there's nothing else we can divide into that to make that any smaller. So that is the smallest factor, and that's called your simplest form. So the fewest equal parts. Yesterday, we started with the fewest equal parts and we got bigger. Today, we started with the bigger one and got smaller. This has a little bit more steps than this one does. So this one makes us think a little bit harder. So we'll be practicing this tomorrow. But make sure you have your notes. You don't have to understand it yet, but just have your notes so at least you've seen it and you've written it a few times. If you notice, this one has, when you're making it smaller, when you're making the number of parts smaller, you're dividing. When you're making the number of parts, more number of parts, the numbers get larger.